Good evening, everyone. I now call to order this special committee meeting for Tuesday, October 24th, 2022. Mr. Harris, can we please begin with the roll call of members?
Yes, Madam President. Mr. Med.
Here.
Mr. Arroyo. Mr. Cleese. Ms. Craig.
Here.
Ms. Diaz.
Here.
Ms. Walsh. And President Beke.
Here. Councilors Walsh, Caleeks, and Arroyo are excused from this meeting. Our one and only agenda item this evening is the Finance Committee meeting, and I will pass it over to Councilor Ahmed.
Thank you, Council President. For this special meeting of the Finance Committee, we will be hearing a audit presentation of the 2022 audit. At this point, I will turn it over to our partners from Maher Dussel.
Oh, yes, I do. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. I'm Jennifer Kruver-Kibbe, the partner with Maher Dussel. And I just want to apologize. I am getting over a cold, so if I have to cough here and there, I do apologize. I'll try to not cough directly into the microphone. But the presentation format is very similar to the previous year's presentation, so it's meant to be high level. I could go over every single page of the 180 document of the financial statements. I'm sure nobody wants that. But this is meant to just be high level overview of the audit itself. So this side, there are certain, we have it in the form of what's called a communication to those charged with governance. So though in accordance with our auditing standards, we have to communicate certain things to management and council. So these first couple slides are just reiterating that information. So our responsibility is to express opinions on whether the financial statements themselves are materially correct in conformity with the accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. And our audit of the financial statements does not relieve management or council of their responsibilities. In planning and performing our audit, we do consider the internal control over financial reporting in order to determine our audit procedures, but we do not opine on the effectiveness of financial reporting. And also because every year the city does expend more than $750,000 of federal expenditures, we perform what's called that single audit, the additional uniform guidance audit, where we select major programs and perform tests of controls and compliance over those. We do issue an opinion over that. And because we perform that uniform guidance audit, we have to perform the audit in accordance with the government auditing standards. So those are all the standards that we perform the audit under. Now, the financial statements themselves, they do include what's called component units. Those are separate legal entities that, because in accordance with the Government Accounting Standards Board, they do roll up into the city's report. So there are a total of 7, and we do not audit all of them. They are included in the report, but our opinion says which component units we do not audit themselves. And because we perform that audit in accordance with the government audit standards, we have to pinpoint which of those individual audits are not in accordance with government auditing standards. So that's listed on this slide. They're not required to be. A lot of the times, the only an entity would be is if they have federal assistance and spending. That a grantor would require them to do that. So this slide, excuse me, goes on the continuation of what we're required to communicate. The significant accounting policies, those are all outlined in Note 1 to the city's financial statements. Now, there was a new standard that the city had to adopt this year, the Government Accounting Standards Board. That's what's required for the city to present in external financial statements. There was a new standard that all governments had to adopt, and that was what's called GASB 87 for leases. And what that did was, this new standard says anything that would have been previously not recorded and would have been an operating lease, now management has to find a value of that and record it as a right-to-use asset and a liability. And then if you're a lessor, which that's what the city was with a lot of the tower lease agreements and things of that nature, you had to record the value of that receivable. So that is all outlined in Note 1. Now, the adoption of this did not impact our opinion or anything, and nor did it affect the beginning balances. So there was no prior period adjustment we had to do. So it's just additional information that's included and grossed up on your balance sheet. But other than that, GASB 87, there were no new accounting policies that were adopted during the year. And the application of existing policies did not change. There were no transactions entered into the city where there was a lack of authoritative guidance or consensus, and all significant transactions were recognized in the proper period. Accounting estimates are an integral part of all financial statements, and the most significant accounting estimates that are included in the city's report are included on this slide here. The only new one for 2022 financial statements were those lease calculations, those GASB 87 calculations. Everything else was as similar as previous year. And we had no issues regarding those sensitive estimates. And the most sensitive disclosure affecting the financial statements was with respect to, there are two funds that have a negative fund balance and negative equity, so that's disclosed in note 21. We had no issues or difficulties performing our audit procedures. We received all the information we needed in order to complete our audit procedures and complete a report. There were two material proposed adjustments that we made and went over with management, and they agreed, so those were corrected in the report. So those are included as what's called a finding, but I'll go over that later. But those are reflected in the report. But other than that, there were no other adjustments that we had to propose. There were no disagreements as part of the audit. We did receive a management representation letter in order to issue the financial statements. There was all similar representations as previous year. Now, if management were to consult with another independent accountant trying to get some kind of second level opinion, we would have to be informed of that. We're not informed of any such issues, so nothing to report there. And there are certain discussions that we have prior to retention of management, talking about audit procedures and new standards that had to be adopted, but then those are not contingent upon our relationship. They're just a normal course of our professional relationship. The results of the audit themselves. So the financial statements, excuse me, the report that we gave on the city's financial statements was called an unmodified opinion. And that's the best opinion that the city can receive. And in our opinion, we stated that the financial statements in all material respects are properly recorded in accordance with the accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. So that is the best opinion that the city can receive. Now, I mentioned that adoption of the GASB 87, that is a separate paragraph in the opinion, but it does not change our opinion. All it does is talk about what that application is and references the footnote disclosure. And as I mentioned, we list the component units that we do not audit. And similar to the previous years, there is what's called required supplementary information included in the report. There's this management discussion analysis, which is in the beginning of the report. I always recommend management to review that and third-party users to see, because it presents a very good high level by management of what significant changes happened from prior year to current year. There's also historical pension and other post-employment benefit information that's included, and budgetary comparison information. That's what's required by GASB to include. So similar to previous years, we perform limited procedures, but we do not opine on that information. And there's also supplementary information that's included as well. Now, there's a schedule of net cost of operations of city sewer system and a schedule of direct expenses. We do not opine on that information, but the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, that's what's required because you have that uniform guidance audit. We do look at that in relation to our opinion, and we had no issues with regarding that, so that was materially correct. Now, this slide starts to summarize some financial highlights for the governmental activities. So the government financial statements themselves, they present financial statements in different types of formats. So this first one includes all of the city's governmental funds. So think of your general fund, your special revenue funds, all your grant funds, your capital projects. So this does not include your utility funds. It doesn't include sewer or water, things of that nature. And this is on the full accrual basis. So this includes your capital assets as assets and your liabilities. So some key changes, you can see the change in net position, that's essentially the net income of the governmental funds, was a $3 million net income during a year, similar to previous year. The revenues had some fluctuations as well as the expenses. These fluctuations mainly result of change in the spending and receipt of timing of grant funds. So there's a lot of COVID money that still coming in. 2021 had a lot more HUD COVID money that was spent. And ARPA money, and that was offset a little bit by the change of different types of grant funding in 2022. This slide is a historical chart comparing the governmental activities, revenues, and expenses just year to year. All this information is summarized in the statement of activities in the financial statements. Is a great page to look at to see by department the costs and how much program revenues are coming to offset that. This slide is a historical chart of the net position for your governmental activities. Net position is essentially your equity. And the GASB requires to report your equity in 3 buckets. Has to be reported under unrestricted, which means there are no commitments to spending. It's not restricted by outside parties. And that's the green that's on this slide. The restricted is, think of any kind of restrictions that are made by trust agreements or other third parties. And net investment in capital assets, where it's taking all of your infrastructure and your assets offsetting the debt. And you can see that the unrestricted is negative significantly. And this is very similar with other third-class cities and a lot of municipality governments, because this includes your net pension liability. This also includes your other post-employment benefit liabilities, which those are actuarially determined based upon period of time, how much the city has promised union agreements and all future retirees. So that's what's driving this negative unrestricted. And those are disclosed in notes 11 and 12 if you wanted to see more information on the pension and the OPEB. Now, the net pension liability did increase during the year, so the liability went up, and that's because the market in 2022, which we've seen that across all of our municipalities. This next slide is on the business type activities. So full accrual, so this is your sewer, water, trash, and stormwater funds. The change in net position, which that's essentially your net income in 2022, was $3.1 million. Some fluctuations in the revenues and the expenses in 2022. So 2022, there was the water rate increase for inside customers and outside city customers. And that's what drove that increase in the revenues. And the, increase in the expenses was mainly due to the transfers out to other funds. And similar to the other charts, this includes the historical analysis of the revenues, the expenses, which again can be looked at on the statement of activities. The net positions, that's the equity for the business type activities, and once again, same buckets as has to be presented for the governmental, so unrestricted, restricted, and net investment in capital assets. So you can see that unrestricted is negative, similar to the governmental activities. Mainly driving that is the net pension liability and the OPEB liability. Now, similar highlights just for your general fund. Now, your general fund is your chief operating fund, and how these amounts are reported are similar to how the city budgets. So if you have debt payments that are made out of your general fund, those are shown as expenditures. You don't report long-term assets as assets. And during the year, there was a net loss in your general fund of $5 million. What drove that was there were adjustments that had to be made for transfers out to other funds. One of them was for funding that there was a RACP grant that technically didn't have a signed grant agreement during the year, and that was one of the material adjustments that we proposed to management. Without a signed grant agreement, you can't recognize the revenue just yet in accordance with the GASB. So once that is approved by the state, then that entry will be reversed. So it's just a matter of timing as to when you're going to get that signed grant document. State usually moves a little slower on those grants because they're multiple year type projects. And then there was another adjustment, a previous due to other fund was reversed out. So that's mainly the reason for that one-time net loss. But on the budget highlights, now the total revenue, there was more revenue received than originally budgeted for the general fund by approximately $3.8 million. We've seen a lot of increases in tax revenues across all of our municipality audits. So there's an increase in real estate transfer tax and earned income tax compared to what the city originally budgeted. And this slide shows the fund balance of just your general funds. This is your equity in your general fund. And the buckets that have to be presented in accordance with GASB is non-spendable, assigned, So that assigned, you can see the blue there, that's where a majority of that fund balance is. So management can choose whether to, out of the entire fund balance, allot it for future spending in other areas. And those are for the 2023 budget, medical insurance claims, debt service, and excess workers' comp expenditures. And then only 7% is unassigned, so that's what's available for spending after those assignments are made. And your general fund balance is $11.3 million as of 12/31/22. And this is a historical graph for your general fund showing the revenue and the expenses year to year. This does not include any transfers in and out between other funds. I like the colors on this one. It's a little messy, but it's autumn colors here. Now, this is a historical governmental funds revenue mix. So this is all of your governmental funds, not just your general fund, but think of all your HUD grant money and all your other state and federal money. That's what's included in here, as well as your capital projects. And you can see taxes is the largest source of revenue, and then your second to largest is your intergovernmental revenues, which that's all your grants and contributions. And this next one is all of your governmental funds, showing the makeup of how the expenses are made, what buckets those expenses are made. You can see by and large, public safety is your largest expenditure out of all those, which made up 52% of total governmental fund expenditures. And the debt service, all the way to the end, you can see that fluctuates a little bit, but that's only because of the timing as to when debt refundings were made. In 2021, those are great markets, so the debt, the city refinanced and refunded a lot of debt, so that's why there's that fluctuation there. Now, moving on away from the number side of the audit, I mentioned the city had to undergo that single audit, and because we perform the audit in accordance with the government auditing standards, if we come across any material adjustments or any deficiencies in internal control and financial reporting, we're required to report as a finding in this government auditing standards. So we did report that as a finding in 2022, and management has agreed with that and already put correction action in place in order to make sure going forward there are review procedures in place. And then for the federal programs, the two we selected is the CDBG, as well as the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, which is the ARPA. So those are the two major programs that we selected. So as a result of that, the federal government, the OMB, tells us what to audit. So there's audit compliance supplements that we use as our audit procedures, and we do additional compliance work and additional control work, and we did not come across any issues as a result of that. So we issue what's called an unmodified opinion in accordance with the uniform guidance, which stated that the city complied in all material respects of the directed material compliance requirements for these two programs. So we did not have any findings regarding that additional testing. And then finally, we just had a best practice recommendation on recording of reimbursements. This is similar to previous years. We just suggest that the city establish general fund expenditure offset account that corresponds to the reimbursements made. And then the government accounting standards, GASB, has some new upcoming accounting standards that will impact future financial statements. The biggest one is going to be the GASB 96, and we'll work with management on recording that. So similar to leases, this GASB tells all municipalities that if they have subscription-based IT, so like it's right to use specific software, if it meets certain criteria, you have to put a dollar value on it, record as a liability and a right to use that asset. So something you might see in the 2023 financial statements. But that's all that I had to cover. Did anybody have any specific questions over the presentation or anything regarding the audit in general?
Thank you for the presentation. The only question I had was regarding the suggestion on the general fund expenditure offset. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes.
So we can just get a better understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. So initially how it's recorded is it's almost duplicated, recorded in the general fund. So there are expenditures that initially made in the general fund and then charges the other individual funds. When those individual funds pay the general fund, it's almost shown twice as a revenue. So we just recommend that it's netted, so it's only shown once on the general fund side.
Thank you. And then just the other question was regarding the grant that hadn't been signed. Is there any best practices to, maybe avoid that in the future? Or I know that was kind of not really finding, but, if you could just elaborate on that. Please.
Yes. So why it wasn't signed yet is because the state was and the city was working very closely with the state on this. They were meeting. So it's not that there weren't, and there were expenditures incurred, but I think the project changed and it molded two grants into one. So that's what held up on the state side, the signing of that agreement. So I think it's difficult to manage such a large scope of a project. I think it just comes down to the accounting of it, making sure on the accounting side, it's not recorded as revenue until you have a signed grant agreement in place.
Thank you, and thank you for answering our questions. Is there any other questions from the committee?
You asked mine. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Council President, if I'm correct, there's no public comment due to this just being a presentation.
Correct. And I would just ask Director Campbell, will the audit presentation or the audit information be available on the city website for review? Yes. Could you just speak to where to find that? Sorry, I may roll that on over.
Yes, I'm actually not sure where it is on the website. I'm looking at the mayor to maybe.
I'm assuming it'll be under the Administrative Services Department.
That as well, yeah.
Yes.
Where you can find all of the budget materials, our audits are posted there for public review.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you very much. Then, having included the business of the committee meeting, I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. We will take a brief recess and then convene our regular meeting at 6 PM. Thank you. Or 6:30. It's not committee. 6:30. Thank you.